walls, letting it fall together. I'm letting go for once forever. Following this map under Father sky is open heart. Golden hair is spun into the lightning whisper to the stars. I turn my eyes into windows to wildflowers, white and black holes. The light meeting in my middle, between two worlds, the pattern wove. A pattern grows into a map. How many times I take this path, woven with the vine, walking the red road alive. Jackie, I be the Maya. Jackie, I be the Maya. Jackie, I be the Maya. Flash of light and open sky, awareness seeing eye to eye. A quilt holding the silence of 1,000 rays streaming through time. I reach out my hand to feel the four winds that turn the wheel. The light meeting in my middle, between two worlds, the pattern move. A pattern grows into a map. How many times I take this path, how many times I peel it back. Still the story stays intact. Free my heart of hearts. Mystery of love, don't go she love. Jackie, I be the Maya. Jackie, I be the Maya. Jackie, I be the Maya. Be the Maya, 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 be the
All right, finally. Peace. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the channel. I had to do a reset, or we had to do a reset. For some reason, the screen wasn't sharing, but it's all good. I can get that working for tonight. This will just be more of an exclusive, where excuse me, we'll talk about the Wale uprising, or I'll go over some things and we can have a conversation about it. This is a war, or said to be a set of battles, often not talked about in his story. And when it is, it's always from their point of view, and it's always secondhand. When it was an attempt to get the first hand, we'll talk about all of that and we'll make it make sense. Um, so peace to the panel. What's going on, y'all?
Peace. What's happening, nephews? Yoko.
Yoko,
Yoko, everything.
what's going on?
All is well.
Yeah, let me send this out since I did have to drop that new link. I'm about to send this to a few people real quick, and then we can get started. I do have a timeline that I'll go over later on tonight. So most of this will be off the dome, but I'll also be sharing some things um, so people can see. When we talk about, or when most people are taught or they hear about the Guale uprising, what they usually hear is there was a chief, and and this chief or leader was upset because he couldn't have more than one wife. Let me send this. Hold on. Let me send this out one more time. That he couldn't have more than one wife. So when he was basically told this, what he did was assemble the chiefs of the Wale territory, or what the Spanish considered the Wale territory, and he convinced them to kill all of their friars. So at this time in 1597, there were about 6 missions in Wale territory. So what happened is, from their account, is that as these men prayed, um, as they took communion or whatnot on St. Francis Day, the Wale painted themselves in red paint and attacked or stormed the missions, stormed the churches. They supposedly had killed all the friars, scalped them, and put their heads outside of their towns as a warning to anybody that would attempt to step on their toes. Now, what was documented or told to Florida was the same thing, and they assembled their troops to go into these territories and check out what was going on. So as they get there, they supposed to have uh, had skirmishes with the Wale. In fact, what's also written is that they went to Escamuku and convinced their chief to capture Wale, and then there were laws put in place that any Wale captured would be would be held for slavery and or referendum. So working in the union, basically the Spanish Union, right, or the Spanish Union Labor or Labor Union, excuse me. Now it's then said that they killed Don Juan, who was supposed to be this big chief, and after they killed him, they basically subjugated the Wale again. This story that I've just told you is what's taken into account in Luis Guillermo or his account, Friar Avila. He also has an account, but for some odd reason, he didn't write his account, nor did he testify to what happened to him while he was held captive. What do I mean? Well, in fact, not all 6 of the friars were murdered. For some reason, there was one friar that was not murdered. And the Spanish didn't know this when they wrote the crown. They wrote the crown explaining that all of the friars had been murdered. And they were murdered because they were meddling in Wale business. Now, what are some things that the Spanish governor of Florida wrote, or what are some things that he said the friars were doing to the indigenous Americans? Well, politics. The friars were choosing who they wanted to be considered the chief of certain towns, and even the missions, that's who they were doing business with. So they would go to the interior or go further south and grab people and replace them with hereditary chiefs. The friars then created licenses. With these licenses, you had to have one in order to leave your town. So as where you could leave when you wanted, you now had to get permission from the priest. When you could marry who you wanted outside of your family, you had to get permission from the priest. So the Spanish governor wrote as if, well, shit, the friars did this to themselves. They are to blame. Now, eventually, when they were interrogating people and asking them what happened, no one knew what happened until the Spanish went into Wali territory. When they went into the territory, they actually were doing business with the chief who was said to have been leaving Macoma on a ship wearing the dress or wearing the whole garb and the hat of the friar, of a dead friar that was found in Macoma province. So now we have someone who was said to have killed the friar doing business with the Florida governor. And when this was going down, the indigenous Wali were telling other Wali, like, look, basically, y'all should give up the friar that y'all been holding captive this whole time. The Spanish really think he dead. And if y'all do that, then we can actually start getting things from them that y'all been getting, but y'all cut off. The big chief say, well, we'll do business with them or we'll talk to them if they bring the 7 children that they've taken from us 2 years ago. This is where the beef started. The Spanish hear that the friar is alive. They bring those 7 children. They leave with the friar, but they also leave with 7 more children or 7 more people. They interrogate these people without speaking to the friar. The friar doesn't want to tell his story. Of these 7, what was explained was the chiefs had a meeting and all of them decided that they were going to kill the friars. But when it was time for the chiefs to be named, the interrogating from different towns gave up the names of different people, so it confused the Spanish. One of the people that they interrogated was asked, well, shit, you come from the town of Tupiqui, and that's the chief that they say started the war. And you say, well, shit, we ain't start the war. Our town got burnt down. The Spanish say, nah, your town didn't get burnt down. Only the church was burned down. What did you have to do with this war? You say, well, all I did was, or he said, and his name is Lucas. Lucas says, all he did was bury the friar. I want it to be noted. Lucas was a Christian Wali. So when he got to his town, he found that his town was in ruins. This is one thing that wasn't first, that wasn't documented in the major account of Or, is that all of the towns that were said to have killed their friars were burned down. Let's make sense. Why uprising or the uprising of somebody not go to it literally was Spanish and certain other Wali and other groups of people that were enemies to the Wali at the time, and they began to kill the Christian Wali and began to kill the friars. I won't say they're right and I won't say they're wrong, but what I will say is right is the fact that the actual account can be found if you know the tradition or if you know the story. So let's make it right. And now we can speed it up. What happened was the traditional Wale and the Christian Wale had war. When the friars were slaughtered, one of them was taken by the traditionalists in order to barter. But when the children were taken or the boys were taken, one of them wasn't just a regular boy as they wrote in their documents. Whole time, Lucas was the son of the big chief. So Lucas buried a friar, and for him burying a friar, did you know, or I would have to tell you, Lucas was hanged. Well, he was hung. He was hanged in the middle of the street for everybody to see. And he was the only person that was only killed on the Wale side for the Wale uprising. Now, the original chiefs we were talking about, like Don Juan. Don Juan was a little man. He was the war chief. His uncle was the big chief. They retreated into the interior, but they didn't cross Tama or Latama because the Latama were friends with the Spanish already in the 1500s. This is also something that's not talked about. So Lucas's death basically led to the Spanish saying, or the governor saying, okay, well, look, we did enough to to subdue the Wale. So now we can start doing business with them. And what happened when they started doing business with each other? 22 chiefs left Georgia and Carolina, came down to St. Augustine in 1598, and they began to become they became friends. In them becoming friends, Don Domingo, which is a name you haven't heard until now, Don Domingo, in fact, was also a Christian Wale, but he wasn't the friend of the friars. He was the friend to the government or the Spanish government, as he actually saved them 3 years prior in 1595. This is how he was eventually baptized, given the name Don Domingo. He went to St. Augustine and they put a mission in his town. So now he's a big chief according to Spain. What the government did was use Don Domingo and use the about 21 other chiefs to invade Wale and began to enslave, murder, rape, and do all type of heinous things to the indigenous people. But they weren't alone. Let's see, I'm gonna see if I can pull this up on the screen. They were not alone. And one moment, let me see if I can pull this up. And one thing about it, I mentioned Escamoko and or Escamaco to make it make sense. Uh, they did not attack the Wale. In fact, they defended the Wale. And the scalps that they handed the Spanish were literally from other people. However, the Spanish made it known and made it clear that those people from Tama or Latama were to raid and to kill the Wale chiefs. What happened is when they started to raid Wale and started to raid, they began to get land granted to them in the coast. So you have Wale chiefs involved. You have the town of Tulafuna. You have Latama, but you also have Sakuhachi. And together, together, they came and killed uh, Don Juan and his uncle, Don Francisco. Now, after they killed Don Juan and killed Don Francisco, excuse me, I first want it to be known, and it is documented, that all 22 of those towns got their ass whooped. They got their ass kicked. I'm gonna try. Let me see if I can share this link and pull myself on the screen. They got their asses kicked. So they went to the was like, look, these arrows ain't good enough. These motherfuckers whooping our ass. The Spanish muskets, and eventually uh, they were able to overpower the town and murder chiefs in a battle at Colomado. Now, the thing about this battle is they mention mounds, they mention trenches, and they mention fortifications. These were three things that were mentioned by the Lenape when it came to who the Teligui were or who the indigenous people were at that time. Now, as they killed these guys, I do want you all to know they spared the women, they spared the children. However, they had the women scalp and chop the heads off Don Juan and Don Francisco. This is how evil they were. After they chopped the heads off of the hereditary big chief and war chief, they scalped Don Juan and bury his head. And they take Don Francisco's head and send it to Spain. But, or attempted to, or Spain wanted them to send the head, excuse me. But Don Domingo was not parting with that, as again, he viewed that as a prized possession. He felt like shit. I went to this battle, I killed him. This is for me. These same chiefs signed a treaty with Spain. And now Don Domingo, who was the one mentioned for killing the friars, Don Domingo, who was mentioned for dressing as the friar he killed, Don Domingo, who was giving away Guale territory to Spanish settlers, Don Domingo was now the big chief, or as they call it, the paramount chief of Guale territory. Now let's make it make sense. What if I tell you the name they called, or the title he possessed, was Miku Mayor, which the Spanish explained was he is the chief of the whole province. He has other chiefs under him. However, Don Juan and Don Francisco were considered as cacique mayor, meaning that they were big chiefs, but they didn't make the final decision, as they were a part of a union. So the union turned into a confederacy based off of what? Spanish influence. Even though these people were Christian, they still managed to keep their things intact. And they merged it with their culture, and some of them merged it with Yama culture. But what happened was the Spanish government didn't give a fuck about that Christianity shit. They were more like the Englishmen. Fuck subjugating a soul. We need to expand the territory. So the Castilians put in place that, hey, we got friends down there. We can have them slaughter the friars, burn down the towns, and we can blame it on the Indians in those towns. However, no one ever thought about, when I say no one, the scholars never thought about or asked themselves, why in the hell would the people kill the friars and blow down or burn down their own towns? Wouldn't make sense. Why would they destroy their own mounds and their own graves? That doesn't make any sense. And why are those who were accused of doing it never attacked, but their towns and everything was still in place? No one ever thought to question, what if the Spanish government created this war between the Guale in order to expand their territory and bring more people under their fold. Because again, you have to remember there were Wale that were in the missions that were dealing strictly with the friars. They had no dealings with the Spanish government. So when people were coming down and rendering obedience to Spain, and I can name over 20 towns of the Wale, I can name over 10 towns of the Makoma, I can name a few towns of the Yama that all came down in the 1500s to render obedience to the crown. But you know who didn't do it? The actual Wale big chiefs. They didn't do it. And they were Christians, but they didn't render obedience to the crown. This is what marked them for death. So when they say Don Juan and his uncle Don Francisco were murdered, along with 22 other hereditary chiefs, the women and the commoners were spared. Nobody thought that they thought that the Spanish was just innocent. Now, while all of this is going on, while all of this is going on, you then have uh what they call Don Juan. And this Don Juan they call a pretender or the new pretender. Let's see if I can pull this up. So what's on the screen now is going to be talking about the war. Let me see if I can pull this up. Uh hold up. Let's see. There we go. Let me get back. So let's go. I'll go to this chapter should be chapter 4. This is chapter 4. Okay. See, okay. Okay. Let's see if I can find this. What page am I looking for? I'm looking for, oh, okay, perfect. I'm looking for 91. I'm tripping. So, a new pretender. So, in chapter 5, the other Don Juan. Top of the top was Blazimo. Peace to everybody in the chat. So, this Don Juan was the chief of Mokoma. Now it says that he and the chiefess were Christians and spoke the Castilian language very well. He had a very good cartage and countenance of great strength, and he was named Don Juan, and he dressed well in the Spanish manner. Now, see, this Don Juan was a snake. What this Don Juan did is he wrote to the crown and he asked the crown, could he become the chief of the Wale? Now, why in the hell would somebody from Macoma feel like he got that type of power? What type of power did the Spanish government give to them by name that made them feel like they could be the rulers or the big chiefs of somebody else shit? They had no jurisdiction. This was not their territory. He was not from over there. Let's read. It says, Don Juan concludes the letter with a stunning appeal. He asked the crown to authorize his appointment as Miku Mayor of Wale territory. According to San Pedro's Cacique, the Wale had committed the murders of the Franciscan friars because they did not have a leader whom they respected, suggesting that his appointment to that office would remedy the fact. Now, what he mean by they didn't respect their leaders is, again, Wale had a big chief, but if you were the chief of your town and your family, you had a form of autonomy. Christianity didn't override that for this side of the Wale. But for the other side of the Wale who were Christian, they allowed the Spanish to dictate what was what for them. Now it says, at first glance, the request seems rather unusual. Don Juan was not even from Wale territory, and he certainly had no legitimate claim to the office of Miku Mayor. Moreover, even if the crown granted his request, what made Don Juan think that the Wale would accept such an outrageous appointment? What then had motivated Don Juan to issue such a request? In the aftermath of the attack on his village, was this an effort to secure legitimacy to launch a counteroffensive against the Wali, perhaps with Spanish military assistance? If so, did he really need the crown to authorize his appointment as Miku Mayor? Now, that letter is in here. I got it in my notes, but it's also here. Now, we ourselves have to attempt to answer these questions, right? We have to attempt to answer these questions, but we have to make it make sense. Being that the Wale were not, or that side, we'll say the right side of the Wale, were not going for shit like that. What happened was the governor who was beefing with them told the Spanish, like, hey, y'all know if y'all do that, y'all gonna set some shit off. Dude, not even from there. Here is a translation of the letter that he wrote. Now, he wrote about himself being a good Christian, all of that. And he wrote about the Wale invading his territory. What he didn't explain is those Wale that invaded his territory were the same Wale that eventually killed the real Wale big chiefs. This is all a game. This is all a game. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. This crown, the traditional Wale, and the Christian Wale, and the Christian Puerto Riba, um, had the same enemy, those who would not bow to the crown. Yes, they accepted Christianity, but they did not allow the government to control what was going on in their own politics. And the moment the friars started to do this, they would remove them from their towns, and then these friars are killed by other people. But those who were removing them were set up for the murders and killed, and then had their wives kill them and 22 other hereditary chiefs. So after these 22 or 24 chiefs are murdered, the next year, 22 chiefs just all of a sudden show up in St. Augustine to render obedience to the crown, 22 new chiefs, and then they put a new big chief in place. But nobody seen the game. Everybody thought, oh, nah, he's upset because he can't have two wives. So he just told everybody to kill the friars. That's some cracker shit. That's some cracker shit. You have chiefs that dress like Spaniards, live like or Castilians, live like Castilians, spoke Castilian, wrote Castilian, prayed Castilian, chanted and did their rituals in the Castilian language. But they doing business in the name of Wale. Now, this was important in this document because it not only blew my mind, but it showed me. Let me see, why is it doing that? Oh well, I'll find it in here eventually. But it showed me. It showed me the lengths that they would go um, to get what they need done. Now, what also was interesting to me is that when they claim that all six friars were dead, we know for a fact that one survived, but he didn't tell his story when he was recovered during the recovery mission. He waited till he got to Spain to tell his story. And when he told his story, you can tell it was bullshit. But why? They were talking to me, telling me to leave my religion and join their religion. Oh, every day they brought new women to me to try to make me have sex with the women. Oh, they made me feel like I was a cheat. They loved me and all of this. They caused no harm to me. While also saying, yeah, they was fucking me up a little bit. And, you know, it's just for some reason, I prayed and I got on my knees and I asked for Jesus, to come free me. And here go the Spanish coming through the gates. And I attempted to lead many of them to the way of Christianity. Some fugazi shit. He was friends with the governor. This is why he didn't die. He was kept safe in Wale territory. Again, he was kept safe in Wale territory. So Lucas names all of these different groups of people um, that were included in these murders. So they have charts for all of this, right? They have the where these people were from. Here's the thing: you left with 7 that you were supposed to give back, but you came back with 7 more people that you took from Wale territory. Now, what's interesting is, why is it that no one is from Don Domingo's town except Pedro? And Pedro mentions that the Indians from Wale territory in Tulafuna killed the friars. He never mentions Don Domingo of Asau because it was the chief of Asau that kicked off the war against those in Macoma. He never mentioned his own chief. But these other 6 come from the territory of the people that they're looking to expand their government into. Now, the story basically ends with the governor retiring and Don Domingo dying as Miku Mayor. But all of the towns that were rendered obedience to Spain, they all got missions. This is the second half of that. This is when the struggle for the Georgia coast began. That is that second half. So what got me about all of this? And then we can free Bill because my 45 is almost up. What got me about reading the document, because I read it all. I even printed it and read it all, is that you can tell from the historic towns, you can tell who still carried the blood. What I mean by that is the town of Ospo or Haspa, right? Ospo is often mentioned in this book, but um, or but it's also mentioned during the Yamasi era. So in the 1500s, this town that put up a fight against the Spanish was a town that put up a fight against the English in the 1700s. You see towns like Alutsi or the Blackwater, and this town was mentioned in the Muskogee tome, but this is also a town that put up a fight in the 1700s. Tolamato, Asau, all of these towns mentioned fought in the 1700s. The Latama, who first were enemies to certain people that were in the Wale province, they fought. Their name is also mentioned in the 1700s. Sakuhachi, from the 1500s to the 1700s. So a lot of people like, oh, April 15th, 1715, you know, we kicked off the war and this. But I want you to know before that, people was already whooping that ass. Now we're gonna go over a timeline. The timeline should clear us out, and then we get into the bill, or we can talk about the war. If anybody have any particulars they want to know about the war, just join tonight. And I'll give way more detail, and it'll move faster. Because I gotta be up at 4, so it's definitely gonna move faster. Let's see if I can find this timeline. Hold up. Let me see if I can find this timeline. Let me see. Let's see. All right, here we go. Here we go. So here's the timeline. So um uh they documented this very well too. But November 24th, 1595, this is when the Frencian missions first began being established in Wale territory. So at that time, this is Domingo Martinez. This is who christened Don Domingo, right? This is where the name Don Domingo comes from, or Little Domingo comes from, Florida's governor. Because when Don Domingo saved the Spanish, they took him there to become an ally. Now, in October 7th, 2 years later, he raided San Pedro, and the other Wale chiefs were blamed for it. But the revolt began October 18th, 1597. Um, Let's see what else we have. So, talking about the villages, being that they didn't kill anyone, what Menendez really did was burnt places. So he burned Ospo down. He burnt down Sapala. Tolomato was already burnt down. Sakuhachi, all of these places had fires. So they really didn't know what the fuck was going on. Then you have the next year where it says, in an effort to further punish the Wale and gather intelligence, Governor Menendez reaches an accord with the cacique of Escamaco. Now, he believes that he was given Wale scalps. That's false. But later, uh 16 about around 1600s, this is the first time that Don Juan was officially held or said to be responsible for the Wale uprisings. And King Philip III actually was the one um who ordered Menendez to go ahead and attempt to murder those chiefs, right? So they were from the town. They were from the town of Wale to Piqui, Aspo, excuse me, to La Fina. Uh, they were by the crown said to be on that hit list. Eventually, all of those men were murdered. Later on in that year, which would well later on in 1601, it was about 500 Indians who raided the town, or one of the ancient towns. And they did what they did. Then November, so about a month later, they came through with the scalps and all of that, and they became friends with the Spanish all over again, and Asau, right? Which is kind of crazy. Isn't it crazy that Asau started the war, but they became the big mission to the Spanish? Now, I want to tell you, Asau was renamed Santo Domingo de Asau, basically stamping that Don Domingo was the big chief and that Asau was now the big town of those people who considered themselves to be Iba. So that's a little rundown that I have for right now. Um, Tonight, once I do hop on tonight, I'll speed it up. I'll be more into the vibe, and then I'll actually be dropping a lot more information. That's when I'll be reading the document. So tonight, I'm gonna be reading through all of this. Let's
You
see.
know
Hold
what's so
on,
crazy,
yo.
nephew? You know what's
Talk
so
to me,
crazy?
my
That
time up.
shit, that shit was not that long ago, and people don't even know. And it's
Nope.
crazy because to see the Spanish as the friends of the Castilians in the Roman Catholic Church, and they still have a hold to our people today because they became Catholicisms. It's crazy. It's like it's real crazy. Like you still got the Catholic churches still up in the La Floridas Shut up. They, yeah, kept there. Well, you thinking I'm fussing? I'm not fussing. I'm on the line. If I got to tell you one more time, I'm coming there with that belt. And, so what wind up happening is it's like they still have the Catholic churches of the Spanish and stuff in Florida and Louisiana and all over, man. This shit is crazy. And yet these people go to these churches and they swear that the Roman Catholic Church and the Spanish government were holy saints and shit. Well, all along they was doing evil towards us, we the people.
For anyone still tuned in, I have it highlighted on the screen where they were talking about that battle and where those women were forced to basically scout their dead kinsmen. Then again, it's here it says he also presented Governor Menendez with Don Juan Scout, a gift from the new Miku Mayor of Wale territory, Don Domingo of Asau. So you see the game. You say, well, they didn't like what the Spanish were doing to them, so they went and killed all the friars. But the same people that you said about that, or you say that about, they fucking killed the real chiefs and 22 other chiefs, and didn't show up with 22 chiefs in Florida. Of It's the reason many don't know about this. This is before the Englishman could even set his foot in. Two, yes, two, baby. So I don't know, but it's again for me. It's like, damn, did it really take them this long to put that together, or were they really trying to like because it has to make sense to somebody that the church and the state were beefing. It has to make sense to somebody. But they tried to avoid that conversation that the governor and the friars were beefing on how to handle the situation in Wale territory. The friars didn't have to listen to the governors, but the governors were advised to listen to the friars. This is why they had them people killed. That's why they had them put down. Let me see if I can find this. Um, what page is that? Is it page 90? Let me see if I can find this. Mm-mm-mm. Hold up. Okay, the other Don one. Uh, interesting. Interesting. Because I want to see where it should be in this chapter. Um, because they have hit. I already went over his letter, but the execution of Lucas was crazy. It was crazy as shit because the Spanish were so evil when they were interrogating Lucas. They had his brother interrogate him. See, remember I told you they took the children and then they took seven more children. Well, Lucas's brother was a part of that first batch of children they taken from Wale territory, and attempted to make Christian. And Amador was used to interrogate his brother. Now, the Indian Lucas sentenced to torture. So it is here that we will read that he was sentenced to torture. And what they said that he basically would be waterboarded. If this paragraph here is read, he'd basically be waterboarded. And being who he was, he didn't want his brother to interrogate him because that shit was hurting him. So he asked the Spanish, fuck having my brother do it. Y'all tell me what y'all gonna do to me. And they say, well, for your part in this, you will be found guilty. And all he did was bury a friar. But after reviewing the statements and decrees contained in these proceedings, it is evident that Lucas, the son of Tupiquis Kakik or Kashike, is guilty of having participated in the murder of Friars Valles. Now, it's wrong because those that know the details know that Lucas was being a good Christian, but the Spanish couldn't find anybody to hold accountable and be honest about holding them accountable. So they got an hereditary chief because he was next to be big chief. His uncle was big chief. So they got Lucas. They got his brother, who also would have been in line. They kill Lucas, keep the brother, and then go murder the uncle. So now that town has no hereditary rulers. So they start moving people from the interior into these towns to replace the Wale. I told you this about the 1500s in 1667. I couldn't wait to walk it back to 1590 because it is here that you begin to see the actual play. Because in 1530 and 1570, the Spanish were not allowed to settle on the Georgia coast, or what is considered the Georgia coast today, or the Carolina coast today, which all was Florida. But what they considered that North Florida region, they wasn't fucking with it. We're not talking about West Florida. Talking about Georgia, Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. They wasn't fucking with them people. They weren't allowing them to settle. So in order to do it, they had to get other chiefs to bring the nation down. They had to make friends with other indigenous people from around the way. So the reason they tell you, well, the Yamasee didn't exist until the 1600s is because the Confederacy didn't exist until the 1600s. But Latama or Layama or Yama existed. Ichisi existed. Ichisi and Oconee are the same. That's a group of Yama that eventually became the majority in the Oconee town. So they became speaking Hichiti, which is you get the Oconee calling them Ichisi. That's the history of that. So
But
these
you all,
people who were already there during that era became friends with the crown and went to war against other groups of Wale. Now you understand why those same groups that I mentioned knew where St. Augustine was almost 100 years later when the Chichimiko began to raid down on them. So anybody in the chat have any questions, drop those. Anybody on the panel, let's build about it. Let's talk about it. If y'all
and,
not gonna build, I'm glad y'all in the background. Talk to me,
and,
Unc.
then, and then you know what else too, nephew? It all comes down to they bought their family feud over here, and we didn't even much know they was family.
Facts. Yep.
Because dealing with
And when
dealing
when
with
when when and when people figured out, it's too late.
right, right. Because look at it, right? Look at it. And you know what movie? You know what movie showed you this? The Pirates of the Caribbean, The High Tide, where it shows that the Castilian and the British was fighting to be the world power of the Roman Catholic Church because they were trying to find the fountain of youth and everything, which they're not knowing that the fountain of youth was actually our springs. You know what I'm saying? But dealing with that, when you had the king of England and you had the king of Spain, all of them was relatives. And that's how
Yep.
they were able to be under the Holy Roman Morisco Empire of the West, dealing with Western Europe. And when that happened, you know, the Spanish and the Portuguese, once again, the Castile and the Portuguese, they was family, but then the Pope split their family up, and that's how there was like, well, we'll give Portugal to this person and we'll give Castile to this person. You know what I'm saying? And when that happened, there was like, okay, well, you got some of the dramatic tribes that left from over here and went to France with dealing with the Frankfurts, and then they went over there into England and everything and stuff. Because when you look up the bloodline, you see that the Queen of England, her bloodline goes directly to Germany. You know what I'm saying? Queen, what's her name? The one that just not too long passed away, Queen Elizabeth. You know what I'm saying? And all of them was
The lizard. Mm-hmm.
yeah, all of them was family. So that's funny how they showed about the PBS documentary, the secrets of the Spanish La Florida, where it shows that the Spanish and the French and it was fighting, but yet you had two brothers that was up the throne of Spain and France. That was Louis the 14th and King Alfonso. And they was brothers because they was of the House of Orleans. You know what I'm saying? So now you got to really ask yourself the question: how you have the Spanish, they have the House of Orleans, and the French of the House of Orleans, because that's the same family. That's the same family. So by us over here not knowing that these people were all related and that it was a family feud, we all got caught in the middle of it. And look at the circumstances of it now. That's messed up. And I'm very pissed behind the situation. After all these motherfucking years, I'm still pissed off because the Spanish Catholic Church is still thriving in our territories and everything. The Spanish government here in doggone 2017, the King of Spain, he came for the 300-year of centennial anniversary, you know,
My,
and it's like, how
uh,
the fuck you come? How the fuck you? Because he came to Florida and he came to Louisiana. But if you didn't supposed to have the lands no more, how the fuck you come over here on a tour? See, they just lying all the way around
I had
because
dropped. Who you talking about?
King Philip, the king that's of Spain now, King
Oh,
Philip.
yeah.
He came in 2017 to France. I mean, he came to Florida and he came to Louisiana in 2017. So they talking about they
Let's see
got
if I can get this
independence
back
or
up. What's
they
going on?
sold the Floridas. How
It's
you gonna
glitching.
sell it when the king still came over here to Florida? You remember when he came over here in 2017? Her nephew?
Oh no. Nah, the screen glitching. You know how this shit go. Once I get the roll and it go to glitching up. What? So you have to repeat that.
King Philip of Spain. King Philip of Spain came to Florida in 2017 and he visited Louisiana in 2017. But if they supposed to
Oh,
have sold, if they had supposed to have sold to the United States, why he came over here? You remember when King Philip came from Spain over here to Florida in Louisiana in 2017? You know about that?
you said 2017?
Yeah.
Nah.
Look it up right quick. King Philip of Spain. He came to Florida in 2017 and Louisiana. Him and his wife.
Shit, I don't know. Shit, they still delegates. I wouldn't know why. But this shit, I don't fuck. Listen, what I want, what I'm on is this right here. This is what I'm on.
Yeah,
How?
but basically what I'm
Go
saying
ahead.
is, but basically what I'm saying is they still got jurisdiction over our lands dealing with the Spanish land grants.
I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it. Something I find important on this St. Francis Day, when they talk about the attack on the friars in Macoma territory, is uh, uh, is interesting. Is the 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 authors let you know who was doing what. See, when he says he used two indigenous names. So here he's speaking on the Macoma or the Macoma speakers. And here he mentions the Iba'a, which the Spanish called Guale. Tonight, that's going to be a big part of this conversation. Because many people don't know um, when we say Igua'a or Iba'a or Abala, Yufala, Yupa'a, Chikora, right? Uh, these are dealing with the same people. And we can't shy away from it. We can only tell the story. Um, we can't shy away from it. We can only tell the story. So when we're talking about um, Wale territory going forward, we're gonna have to clarify, um, is that what they made, or are you doing what your people made? And if you're doing what your people made, then you should be union. And there's no way around it, because there's no way, and it's crazy. I'll use this, right? But I'll say for me, for us, there's no way that anybody would be pacified over here. By and we must talk about this for the fact that it was the beginning of the end of a lot of traditional. That's what I'm on for today. Now, when we talk about like what Unc was talking about, he mentioned them being family. It wasn't until the 1600s that the Wale understood that, hey, these people were family. And by that time, it was too late. So those that were living in Florida who understood, like, damn, this is a family feud, as they attempted to stay out the way, even their towns became separated because of the politics. But it was no longer Spanish politics. This was now dealing with Indian politics. Here we see the town Alutsi and we see Asau. Alutsi and not Asau, well, not speaking, well, you see those both, but Alutsi and Aspo again are definitely Wale towns, in ancient towns that existed before the migration. And if you read the book, The Yamasee Indians, Florida to South Carolina, um, in fact, they have a chapter dedicated to him. Let me see if I can find that chapter and open it up real quick. And read a couple things. What's wild is this: the chief that led during the Yamasee War, the Wale chief that led during the Yamasee War, is it not ironic that he has the same name as the Wale chief in the 1500s? But this is chapter 10, Chief Francisco Hospach, as they call him, or Hospag. So it says, in the 1680s, a significant number of the Walees began to abandon ties with the Spanish and to migrate from their lands among the Georgia coast and its river deltas towards South Carolina, becoming Yamasees. Listen to that dagger. Now listen to this. In 1567, 76, excuse me, a war erupted between the Spanish at St. Helena and the Wale. Successful attacks by the Wale and Norista on the Spanish settlement forced the Spanish to evacuate St. Helena. After a period of relative peace or peaceful missionalization, in 1597, the Wales killed 5 Franciscan missionaries. Now, Menendez retaliated by destroying the Wale villages and burning their maize crops, creating a famine. So that was that. It then says, but the Wale were subject to reprimando. So now they're becoming slaves. So what we hear, Chief Hospage or Hospag, right? Ospo, his people split. Some of them went to Carolina and became known as the Yamasee. Now, in the 1660s, the Westo moved against coastal Georgia, attacked the northern Wale towns, but also brought a viable alternative to the Spanish allegiance as refugee Yamasees began to settle in Wale Mocoma. Among them, or among their leaders of the Wale language of Ospo or Ospach, persisted as the Wale mission villagers and thus remained allied to the Spanish. But immigrant Wale joined the Yamasees to attack Wale missions and to capture Spanish allied Wale as slaves. Among these Wale Yamasee were the Ospos, or became Hospa in South Carolina. Interesting. Interesting. John Worth asserts in his 2002 essay, Spanish Missions and the Persistence of Chiefly Power, that chiefly lineages lasted far longer in the southeast coast than they did in the interior. Now he says that the Hospas, these family, those in Florida, they stayed allies to the Spanish, even as the majority of the Wale joined the Yamasee Indians. Now, Chief Ospo, he's used or cloaked under the term Indian In Francian documents, he's documented Indian. However, his children, his wife, uh, they're considered something completely different. And though they're not considered mulatto or not mulatto, they're not considered Indian in the paper. They were considered pardos y morenos, so blacks and browns. But it was placed in his family will that they were indigenous people. Blew my mind. Now, Haspa or Ospo, as they call them, that was the town he was the big chief of. However, he was born in Alutsi. So Alutsi and Ospo, two towns that fought in 1570, that fought in 1590, they were loading themselves up to fight again in the 1600s or around 1680, and it boiled overhead in 1615. So 1715. So their nephews continued to fight. So this is hereditary. This is bloodline that's fighting these wars. It wasn't until these bloodlines came together with people they fought almost 200 years earlier to form the Yamasee Confederacy. So Antonio, because that's his real name, that's my middle name, Dagger, nobody knew. There you go. So Antonio, who was born in Alutsi, the big town, became known as Francisco Antonio Hashpa. And he was one of those people that led, he and his cousin. So that's the tie-in from the Guale uprising to what's termed the Yamasee War. Originally, these were the same people fighting that fight against a different people, but now they were going under a new name or something that someone else had named them. So historical doc or other documents like this, John Worth, right? I can read this from John Worth. This is Yamasee origins and development in the South Carolina, Florida frontier. And he asked, who were the Yamasees? And he says they have variously been called the tribe or confederacy and have commonly been placed on comprehensive ethnic and linguistic maps of the original Southeast Indians, generally positioned somewhere in southern Georgia, in the southern Georgia interior, or along the Georgia and Carolina coast. He then says, I use the term confederacy intentionally, primarily in order to distinguish it from a chiefdom. So it wasn't the chiefdoms of the 1600s or the 1500s, but it was a mash of different people coming together, and which was needed in order to defend the people from what was to come. So, in the history of the Creek Indians and their neighbors, Swanston basically asserts that the Yamasee must have been an indigenous tribe originally connected to the coastal Wale, but were somehow obscured to late historical records. Now, it has been thought by recent investigators that the people of Wale and the Yamasee were identical, but facts contained in the Spanish archives shows that this is incorrect. Now, the reason that had to be stated was this. When they came together to form the Confederacy, there were people a part of that who, hold on, let me flip this real quick. See, perfect. There were people that were a part of the Confederacy that were already friends with the Spanish. So when they came in, the Spanish knew like, okay, hey, these are the Yama, these are our friends. These Wale are our friends. The English were not trying to hear that shit. The English said, we don't know nothing about no Wale. That shit dead. Because remember, there was a war between the Wale and the Englishmen. So they will know nothing about the Wale, but will accept these Yama people. Who are they? And this is where you get documents like this, where it talks about the Yamasi towns that were set up. And now I'll read a little couple things from here. So let's talk about how it was put together. So it says, during the first half of the 17th century, the Wale and Tama fared quite differently in the face of an ever-growing European presence in the region. The Spanish continued their efforts to missionalize the Wale and encouraged them to lead settled lives or lead settled lives in large, says permanent villages surrounding the mission station. Traditional Wale beliefs and values were belittled by the Spanish, who intended to convert these heathens into good Catholics. The people of Tama, on the other hand, had little contact with the Spanish during the early decades of the 17th century. So their dealings with these people were completely, it was different. So now it then says that shortly after settling Charlestown, the English sent Henry Woodward up the Savannah River. So they sent him to speak with the Westo. Now it says by 1675, the Westo had already begun driving the Tama from the interior of Georgia. And these Tama arrived living in the missions of both the Wale and the Appalachee. Many of the Tama refugees settled on the coastal islands located between the Wale missions and St. Augustine. In both Wale and Appalachie, these Tama refugees were referred to as Yamasis. Dagger. Now, a force of Westo Creeks and Cherokees attacked two Wale missions, right? And we talked about that. I read the original document to show you which group of Cherokee they were. And then we talk about the towns. So outside of that, we can talk about the towns. So when these Yamasi made it to Carolina, let's see, Al says many tribes, one nation. I can't say that. I'll say many tribes, many nations, one confederacy. That's what they had. And it was so beautiful that they operated in their own accord. So when the Wale made moves, they made moves. When the Yama made moves, they made moves. And this document here is very special because it puts things in their proper place. It speaks on Potocaligo originally being Wale, along with the northern towns. All Upper Yamasi was Wale. I know there's a change today where the lower Yamasi are in the upper seats, but properly that is Wale. And the reason it was positioned that way is because the Tama, or that branch of Yama, and the Ichisi, the Oconee, or the Hichiti speaking Oconee, they were the custodians, and they were the coast guards for the Englishmen because they were keeping a border between the Wale and the different groups of Europeans. So they basically were protecting them in a way. Had their own dealings. They were doing business together for whatever reason. Now here, let's talk about it. So here's another government document. This is their doc, right? Um, it says it's talking about that mash together. So it says by 1700, many of the Wale had relocated south to Florida. However, some of the remaining Wale population joined with the Tama to form the Yamasi tribe. And again, here in this document, they use the term tribe, which scholars today who've studied, who know more, they term it again confederacy because those towns, those chiefs, they had or they operated with their own form of autonomy, and that's what Europeans couldn't understand is, oh wait, we're calling them a nation based off our standard of what we think a nation is. They weren't like we speaking of them, they weren't calling it what it actually was. It was something they created because it was created in the face of war. But again, remember, these same people, or a lot of these same people, joined up in the 1500s to fight different battles. So that's all I got for today. Pam, y'all got any questions or anything to touch on? If not, I'll drop it. It's on y'all, though.
I knew your middle name was Antonio.
Say it again, Carl.
I knew your middle name was Antonio. I just didn't say that.
Hell no. Hell no.
Real. Mm-hmm.
Let's see what we got. No, we don't have no questions. I can end it and get back to what I was doing. But tonight, I'm actually going to be reading the documents. So I'm going to be going through the documents. Like I said, it's going to be a lot faster. But I'm going to be reading a lot of the documents. That's why it's going to smooth through. So it's going to be papers everywhere. I'm going to have the screen shared, all that good shit. Ain't got too much else to say. What I am going to do tonight is I got a point to make when it comes to certain people. Speaking about this, people have to, bruh. I can't be the only one talking about this type shit. Everybody got to do it. And I'm only available on the weekends, and it's so much information to get out because once we go to reading these shits online tonight, it's gonna be a lot of upset people because you can't overlook these documents. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you think. You still have to study other people's work. You still have to study other people's work. So with that being said, peace. I'll get with y'all tonight.
Yo.